widespread death of honeybees has some farmers fretting, because if honeybees disappear, who will pollinate their crops?
Almost any kind of insect you can think of.
Margie Mayfield, an ecologist at the University of Queensland in Australia.
Globally speaking, flies are probably the second largest group of crop pollinators. In particular, a group called hoverflies or syrphid flies. And these are these sort of large-eyed flies that if you take a hike, you sometimes see them hovering in front of your face.
Along with hoverflies, the army of underappreciated pollinators includes butterflies, moths, beetles, ants, and wasps. Mayfield and her colleagues analyzed more than 36 studies on pollination, covering 17 crop plants grown on 5 continents. And they found that some of these underdog insects accounted for some 40% of the flower visits. And some of the crops in their review, especially tropical ones like mangoes and custard apples, did not rely on honeybees at all. Even commodities like canola did fine without the bees. The meta-analysis is in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Mayfield says part of the difficulty in gauging the importance of bees starts with the research methods. A third of the studies they initially considered, for example, ignored everything but bees.
You know, the European honeybee is obviously from Europe, so there's a lot of focus on the European honeybee there.
Another issue, she says, is just raising awareness among farmers.
I've encountered farmers in California and in South Africa and in Australia who spray their pesticides largely at night because that's when the bees have gone back to their hives. And they do that with the idea that we'll spare our pollinators and we'll be able to control our pests. But that very much takes the assumption that only bees are important pollinators.
Of course, we should still do our best to save honeybees, the celebrity pollinators. But agricultural practices should consider the rest of these tiny farm workers too.
Height is correlated with a lot of things. Up to a certain height, taller people make more money than the vertically challenged, and the taller presidential candidate almost always wins. Now a study finds that your height as an adult has a profound effect on your perception of your health. Short people judge their health to be worse than average or tall people judge theirs. The research was published in the journal Clinical Endocrinology. Data for the study came from the 2003 Health Survey for England. More than 14,000 participants filled out questionnaires and had their heights measured. The study only looked at how good the subject thought his or her health was, not their actual health. Questions focused on 5 areas: mobility, self-care, normal activities, pain or discomfort, and anxiety or depression. Men shorter than about 5'4" and women shorter than 5 feet reported the worst impressions, but small increases in height at the low end had much bigger effects on perception than the same increases among taller people. Other studies have shown, ironically, that shorter people on average actually live longer.
They're called button cells, coin cells, or watch batteries. By any name, these tiny round batteries pose a choking danger to small kids. And if a child succeeds in swallowing a button cell, the battery may short-circuit in the moist esophageal environment, burning the tissue. A few thousand kids wind up in emergency rooms each year after swallowing a button battery. But a team of Harvard and MIT researchers that includes prolific inventor Robert Langer thinks they have a partial solution, a protective coating. The scientists covered batteries with a material, technically a quantum tunneling composite, in which microparticles of conductive metal are suspended in an insulating layer. Under most circumstances, including inside of a child, the layer is non-conductive. But when the material is subjected to high pressure, the microparticles are squeezed close enough together to carry a current. One such pressurized environment is the typical battery compartment in a small device. You often have to force the battery into place. So the same battery that remains inert when swallowed works just fine when it's jammed into its slot in a hearing aid. The waterproof design would also protect batteries from corrosion in high humidity. The research is in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Tests with pigs found the coated batteries to be gentle on the porcine esophagus. Next step, figure out a way to keep kids from putting the batteries in their mouths in the first place. Can a quantum tunneling composite be made to taste terrible?
Scientists discover new species all the time, on the order of 15,000 a year. One of the latest additions to the Tree of Life is a new type of leopard frog, which might sound unremarkable, except for where it was found: New York City. But how's a frog go unnoticed in the Big Apple? Well, even experts have a hard time telling this new species from its northern and southern cousins, on looks alone. But the new guy has a different croak, which raised ecologists' suspicions. So they tracked down 4 leopard frog populations with the unique call, including one within view of the Statue of Liberty, and took DNA samples. As they suspected, the odd croakers weren't southern or northern leopard frogs, or even a mix. They had a genetic ancestry of their own, earning them new species status. Those results appear in the journal Molecular Phylogenetics and Evolution. The frogs are tough New Yorkers. The center of their range appears to be Yankee Stadium. But the researchers say the urban amphibians face threats like pesticides and infectious diseases, not to mention real-life games of Frogger.
It's good to keep on your toes. Metaphorically, that is. Not when you're actually out for a stroll. Because a new study suggests that it takes nearly twice as much energy to walk on your toes than it does to land on your heel. Humans are among a small handful of animals that tend to strut heel to toe. Chimps and other apes do it, as do bears. But most critters bounce on the balls of their feet, think cats and dogs, while others trot on their toes, like horses and deer. To find out whether our gait gives us any advantages, scientists asked 27 volunteers to walk on a treadmill all 3 ways: heel first, ball of the foot first, or up on tippy toes. The participants also wore face masks that enabled the researchers to measure their oxygen consumption. The results? The subjects walking on the balls of their feet, in addition to looking ridiculous, expended 50% more energy. The ones prancing on their toes needed 83% more energy. The study's in the Journal of Experimental Biology. The bottom line, landing on our heels provides more leverage and limits energy losses to the ground, and does not look like a tribute to classic Monty Python.
Parts of the planet warm and cool during El Niño and La Niña, and infectious diseases also wax and wane in step with that climate cycle. Take malaria, shown to spike in northern Venezuela during cool La Niña conditions, or flu pandemics, which often follow months after La Niña sets in. Now researchers have linked another public health risk to El Niño climate cycling: poisonous viper bites. Their study area was Costa Rica, where health centers keep rigorous records on snake bites. They compared 9 years of those snakebite records, including some 6,500 bites, to climate data over the same period. And they found that snakebites were 2 to 3 times as prevalent in the hottest and coldest years of the El Niño climate cycle. Sounds counterintuitive, right? You might expect the climate extremes to have opposite effects. But the researchers say in hot, dry years, plant productivity peaks, driving an increase in the number of rodents, aka snake food, and potentially increasing the number of snakes. And snakes tend to move around more in hot, dry weather, increasing chances they'll encounter and attack an unlucky farmer. In cold, wet years, on the other hand, prey numbers plummet, forcing snakes to travel beyond their usual slithering grounds to eat, again increasing chances of an unlucky meeting. The study is in the journal Science Advances. The researchers also found 2 more variables that correlate strongly with Costa Ricans' odds of being bit: poverty and destitute housing. A reminder that when it comes to dangers from environmental disruption, it's often the least fortunate who are at the greatest.
Have you ever wanted to turn down the volume at a deafening concert or noisy bar? Envy the whale. A new study finds that toothed whales can reduce their own auditory sensitivity when they expect a loud sound. The work is presented at this week's Acoustics 2012 meeting. Whales and dolphins rely on their responsive hearing to interpret returning echolocation clicks. Previous research suggested that these marine mammals could dull their hearing before uttering outgoing echolocation clicks, which are very loud. Could they use the same coping mechanism for external noises? To find out, researchers trained a false killer whale that a loud noise would always follow a brief warning signal. Then, they attached suction cup sensors to the outside of the whale's head and played the signal. The sensors measured brainwaves that indicated the whale did reduce its hearing sensitivity in expectation of a clamor. The researchers hope to test other species as well. Loud noises from ships can disturb whales. To accommodate marine life, perhaps vessels could emit signals before making a ruckus, warning whales to tune up.
If you've spent any time hitting up the giant wholesalers or other markets this holiday season, you've probably figured out that you can make a full meal out of those tasty little samples they often dish out. Which seems like a good thing for you and for your wallet. But a new study shows that these tempting little treats really do entice you to buy what you try, and maybe some other stuff like it. Researchers tracked the sales in half a dozen stores that provided samples of snacks in 4 categories: healthy, salty, frozen, or branded by a large coffee shop chain. They found that noshing while shopping convinces consumers to buy the featured product more often than does simply seeing the product displayed at the end of the aisle. They also found that repeating the sample offering multiple times translates into sustained interest in the product, and that stores that have a smaller assortment of products for sale benefit more than the warehouse-size emporia. The findings served up in the Journal of Retailing. The researchers also discovered that the effect extends beyond the product itself, such that, for example, nibbling on one brand of cookies makes you hungry for cookies in general, including those from competing brands. Which suggests that a rising tide really does lift all boats. Or, at least that a tray of free taquitos will certainly lift a lot of shoppers' spirits, and it'll keep those registers ringing well into the new year.
Beluga whales live in the world's cold northern seas, where they endure months of perpetual darkness.
So they have to use sound rather than sight in order to find their way around.
That's Aaron Mooney, a marine biologist at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts. He says belugas have really fast hearing, too.
Sound underwater travels 5 times faster than it does in air. And so those guys have to basically perceive and utilize sound 5 times faster than we do.
He and his colleagues traveled to Bristol Bay, Alaska, to test belugas' hearing in the wild. They captured 7 belugas for routine physicals and played them a series of frequencies while measuring the whale's brain activity with electrodes. Turns out the whale's hearing was sharp and similar to that of captive belugas, which means they could appreciate sound ranging from about 4 kilohertz to 150, a frequency nearly 8 times higher than the upper limit of our ears. The results are in the Journal of Experimental Biology. The older belugas tested in this survey still had decent hearing too, but that might not be the case for belugas living in noisier Cook Inlet near Anchorage.
There's a lot of military activities, a lot of commercial activities, in Cook Inlet, and those animals are known to be declining at a rate of about 2% per year. And we think noise is a major stressor to those animals.
And now that researchers know what wild belugas should be able to hear, they can test Cook Inlet belugas to see whether that underwater noise is literally deafening.
It's not easy being yellow. Bananas now face 2 separate fungal epidemics which threaten to pluck the fruit off of our tables. Fortunately, researchers have now sequenced banana DNA, producing the genome of a banana variety that may hold the secret to defeating the diseases. The report is in the journal Nature. Today, half of all bananas, including the ones you probably buy, belong to the Cavendish variety, whose popularity stems in part from having no seeds. But this trait also removes sexual reproduction from the equation. The bananas are thus all genetically identical and identically vulnerable to the 2 fungal epidemics, Panama disease and black leaf streak disease. Researchers sequenced the genome of a banana variety called D.H. pahang, whose genes contributed to the Cavendish. While the genome shows where this fruit fits in the history of plant evolution, it could also help researchers understand why D.H. pahang, unlike its descendant, is resistant to the funguses behind both Panama and black leaf streak disease. Knowing the genes responsible for this resistance could help breeders create stronger, more resistant bananas, which has a lot of appeal.
We ain't got bananas today.
Thanks for the minute. For Scientific American's 60 Second Science, I'm Sophie Bushwick.